Well, welcome everyone. Glad to see everybody connecting in as we come to our final reading here with Brenda Hillman this year. It's actually our final public event of the year. It's a beautiful spring day here, Brenda. We know we wanted to have you here in person, and I know you desperately wanted to be here in person also, but it was into the 80s, and I ran into yellow jackets today, which I thought was way too soon to be dealing with swarming insects. But anyway, it's spring has sprung. But I'd like to welcome everyone to a poetry reading with Brenda Hillman. Brenda is our Kapnick Distinguished Writer in Residence. She's been here all spring working with our students and gave a series of talks as well. I want to especially thank the Kapnick family for funding this series and allowing us to bring people like Brenda to UVA. It just makes a huge difference and impact both on our students and the broader community in Charlottesville. As the reading goes along, you're welcome to send in some questions. If you want, we'll have a brief Q&A at the end. You can use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to send in a question. And one of our MFAs, Raisa, is going to do a proper introduction here in just a second, and she will field the questions and read them to Brenda. So with that, I think I will turn things over to Raisa for a proper introduction.
Thanks so much, Jeb. Thank you so much, Jeb. The first time I met poet and activist Brenda Hillman was a Tuesday in February on Zoom, and I have to admit, I was nervous. Brenda's poems have served as myths or compasses for me, carried in my pocket, flickering across the walls of my life, sometimes almost literally like in Oakland, where I read them out loud by flashlight when a friend's house lost power. But during our conversation that Tuesday, it took a total of 30 seconds for me to feel at ease in Brenda's luminous and generous presence. There was a moment I remember in particular. Brenda said something profound along the lines of, "We must stretch our ideas of beauty to accommodate grief," and then said quite suddenly, "Oh goodness, there's a really active squirrel out my window directly over your head." Brenda proceeded to describe how the squirrel was tearing down hot pink camellia flowers and throwing them onto the pavement. I laughed along with her, and later I kept returning to that moment because, guided by Brenda's seeing, the squirrel's arrival became suddenly imbued with meaning and, dare I say, magical. So too the blackbirds, the snow, my neighbors fiddling with their radio. To spend time with any of Brenda's 10 full-length poetry collections is to be shown both the world magic and sorrow with humor, wit, and mystical wisdom, all while being intimately accompanied to the edge of language. In ever-changing forms of experimental lyric, Brenda reminds us of everything worthy of our awe. She writes of lichen, feral cacti, the moon, cloud caps, and the animal mist of our souls. And yet she never breaks eye contact with ecological degradation, white supremacy, and human exploitation. Do not ignore, quote, murder of Black children, months of loss and violence, her poems tell us. Do not ignore the forests as they burn, the gun shops, the cemeteries filled and filling faster. Neither should you ignore the spirit world, the state of your dreams, the whir under a dove's wing. Reading Brenda's poems this year, I am reminded that to be committed to a life of writing means living between and across elegy and ode. All to say, my classmates and I are incredibly lucky to have Brenda as the UVA 2021 Kapnick Distinguished Writer in Residence, to meet with her about our work, to attend her poetry first aid clinics, to listen to her 3 lectures on metaphor and metonymy, meaning and mystery, magic and morality. Brenda Hillman currently holds the Olivia Filippi Chair in Poetry at St. Mary's College in Moraga, California, where she currently teaches. She's also a chancellor at the Academy of American Poets. In 2010, she was named by Poets and Writers as one of the 50 most inspiring writers in the world for the way she reminds us, quote, "The language we use when ordering a sandwich is also the language we use to make art." Brenda is a recipient of the 2014 International Griffin Poetry Prize, the Northern California Book Award, the William Carlos Williams Prize from Poetry Society of America, and the Academy of American Poets Fellowship, among so many other notable awards. Most recently, she won the American Academy of Arts and Letters Morton Zabel Award. She has dedicated her life to nonviolent activism for social and environmental justice. In her 2018 collection of poems, Extra Hidden Life Among the Days, Brenda writes, "The job of the soul is to stay awake. To be in Brenda's lyric or physical digital presence means to be reminded of all the reasons to awaken, to pay attention in our writing and in our everyday action. It means learning how to love and grieve our world without averting our gaze." Please join me in the honor of welcoming Brenda Hillman.
Thank you, Raisa, for that beautiful. I want to make sure that everyone can hear me because there was a little distortion in the sound. People were commenting in the chat. Could somebody maybe put in the chat that it's okay? There's no garble. Okay, thank you so much. Raisa, thank you for the amazing intro. I just want to express again my deep gratitude to this program, to the Kapnick family, to the faculty and staff at University of Virginia for making me feel so welcome, to the astonishing experience of working with the students. It has been just so gratifying and beautiful. Especially, Jeb, thank you for the technology expertise. I really have loved working with all of you and the students. I have a few more weeks with you. A few personal thanks as well for my family, again, my brothers and my mother, for my beloved Bob, who's been such a great companion during the pandemic. And high school friends, college friends, I don't want to embarrass you by naming you, but I'm just my big embrace, all the friends who have come out to support this semester while I gave the talks and was working with these ideas. I want to dedicate my reading tonight to my teacher, Charles Wright. I am a little bit, I'm thinking maybe Charles doesn't have a computer and he may never hear my thanks, but your teaching meant the world to me 45 years ago. And I want to also big hug and gratitude to my colleague then, Rita Dove, whose friendship has been meant the world to me as well. So this last public part of my residency, I've put together a reading that will span a lot of work over the decades, rather than just reading from recent work. I thought it was an opportunity to speak to a general audience and to tie in some of what I talked about in the talks with the 6 M's, metaphor, metonymy, meaning, mystery, and magic morality. So that's what I did with my planning. I'm mostly going to read short pieces with a couple of exceptions. And I hope to cover about 35 years of poetry in 45 minutes. So I've more or less arranged it chronologically. And I wanted to acknowledge that some people asked me to read things. So I'll try to fit those in as well. And then we'll take questions afterwards. So I'll start with by acknowledging that I'm speaking from Chichenyu Ohlone land in the East Bay, California. This poem is from Fortress, and it is called The Ropes, and I'm dedicating it to Lisa Ruspar. The ropes all night, the ropes dragged me from sleep to the edge of the world, slapping the window with their girlish braids, but there was no girl, only my familiars with their dearest flutterings. Prison, racetrack, school edged in red, smoke from a freighter, blearing its thought behind dawn's poor detail and the insect pathways of a military base. Like water in a sieve, the first birds came, and still the ropes beat the side of the house, not an unfriendly cadence finally, in fact, nearly reassuring. You have survived before, you will survive this time, these gray imperfections, until the sound joined every sound in the universe, the foghorn that always calls the same child, and the clamor of the great bell, and the shaking of the mast as if the ship were real. So I fell in love with dawn when I was a child, and I've written a lot of poems about dawn. After a divorce, I wrote a series of poems called 12 Dawns that are in this book, Bright Existence. So I'm going to read a few of those. And this one, the first poem in the series has to do with taking a child to an ice cream and having a thought about the nature of matter. In general, I was sort of working with the idea of the emergent soul in these poems. This is dedicated, I'm dedicating this to Norma Cole, who mentioned this poem the other day, and also to Martha Ronk, two women who I admire, whose poetry I admire as emergent. Old ice. The thought that you could even save the light, that you could stop it from having to be everywhere at once. You stood in the ice cream shop, and from the street, in a group of silly glass trumpets, light came and broke into millions of itself, shattered from the pressure of being mute who knows how long. There also, leaning against the counter, the child who saw nothing but the bins of sweet color separately rimmed with silver. Behind you, thoughtfully placed by the owners, a photograph of an avalanche, its violence locked in blue spears. The ice moved one way only, and behind the avalanche and behind the posts that held it, the cars went back and forth like mediators. You who do not exist, you stared along the edges of the freezer. Frost glistened and clustered. Suddenly it looked as if one act could be completed, mounting over and over, even under terrible pressure. Perhaps the tiny crystals would last forever. Once it seemed the function of poetry was to redeem our lives, but it was not. It was to become indistinguishable from them. Black Series. Then in the scalloped leaves of the plane tree, a series of short, sharp whoos, a little owl had learned to count. You lay in your bed as usual, not existing because of the bright edges pressing in. All at once, the black, thick O's of the owl made the very diagram you needed. Where there had been two kinds of infinity, now there was one. The smudged circle around the soul was the one the Gnostics saw around the cosmos, the mathematical toy train, the snake eating its tail. Relieved by the thought that the owl's O's had changed, but not you, that something could change and not be lost in you, you asked the voice for more existence, and the voice said, yes, but you must understand, I loved you not despite your great emptiness, but because of your great emptiness. Every life. I'm reading this for Lucille Clifton, who liked this poem. And right before daybreak, the little owl returned, 2 small solid O's like napkin holders. Then the briefer, brighter O's of another bird of prey, not a victim, came across the field to welcome her. Dawn has 4 stages. In the 3rd, everything chooses how much more it will become. Until then, the door is the same color as the hinge. Poems fit into other poems. Every life fits into every life, bright into dark, not deciding. After that, the wall notices the shadow pulled out of the soul, gray as a Puritan, and the brave, dreamy hyacinth starts to be seen. Could the garden have said to the gardener, "I made you grow"? They were beside one another. Could that which was not yet press forward in the world? It seemed for a brief time it could. Okay, and while I was working on Bright Existence, I began to write Death Tractates, and Andy Eaton requested a poem, so I'm reading this for him. Really enjoyed working with the poems that Andy's writing. So this book, Death Tractates, is about the loss of a woman friend. And so reaching out also to all of those of you who have lost people during the pandemic. Secret knowledge. At first, I was able to speak to her quickly just by closing my eyes. She had died in the first week of quinces, when things put forth their secret knowledge. Fiery, random blossoms are allowed to live, and robins don't seem all that common as they swing at the tops of cypresses through new song. And I wanted to hear just one voice, but I heard 2. Wanted to be just one thing, but I was several. I called her more quickly, told her how much I missed her, pausing at the edge of the screen that kept me from her in all the awkwardness of living. And she said it was not up to me to live without her or make the voice be single. She said every voice is needed. Every voice cries out in its own way. And I'm reading this for Donna Massini and Marie Howe. Visiting creature. You think about a poem too much. Like Spanish moss, it starts killing the tree. Look, Berkeley Spring. A mockingbird has chosen you. Try to follow his new short songs, Bree, Bree, Cheat Sheet, and the one that sounds like maybe I will and maybe I won't do any such thing. Each time the gray feathers on the throat part, it looks like another mouth, as though the song came from that. But your friend has been gone such a short time, you can't keep her voice in you yet. Who is noticing her now? What is this to her? So many shifts in that bird's style, yet what a pleasure to watch him, getting drunk on juniper berries, resting lightly on his wing bars. Pretty soon the borders won't bother you either. Pretty soon your loved one will speak forward into this world. So this book seems it's 30 years old. So this is a new poem. My plan is to sort of sprinkle in some new poems while reading across the arc of the work. This new poem is from a series of poems that I've been working on during the pandemic that have to do with this sort of ghostly presence of history in the form of various creatures. And this is dedicated to Carla Kelsey. I was thinking a lot about Hegel. Hegel is a moth. At equinox, same 12 squares window. Short logics. What was hoped for? Sun and mist. Down garden stairs, where immensity is low, crenulate. To send an anxious thought to workers masked. If radiance persists, say yes. Then a crow crossed through the death breath siren path, over mosses, a color from a book sent by a friend, and you think, celandine, back to her, a green from which amethyst could be launched. So Loose Sugar is a book in which I was exploring existence as a sort of emergent sexuality, and I was really intrigued with learning to make fragmentary language into whole lyric, and also the disrupted lyric. So this is a poem dedicated to my daughter, who's the apple of my eye. And she had an all-girls punk rock band in high school. So this is a 4-line poem for all of you mothers out there who have raised teenagers. Band practice. I dropped her off. She was balancing the guitar case on her head. There was one of those abnormal green ladybugs on the front seat. I said, call me anyway, even if you're happy. So, and I thought I'd read 2 poems from the series that's the title series of Loose Sugar. This beautiful cover, by the way, was designed by my beloved friend, Frances Lerner, who's an amazing artist and who's been a sustaining friend for 50 years. 2 brothers. My mom was raised in Brazil, and we spent time in Brazil when we were children, my brothers and I. 2 brothers. I've doubted my belief in sentences because of their refusal to recall certain things. A way of being satisfied, a sound. So the wish to restore them arose. Walking with 2 brothers down Copacabana in the 50s, city of gold teeth, açúcar, such nerves, a developing time sandwich holding hands on the black and white sidewalk, wavy like the graph of a patient who has not been born yet. Our 6 feet shuffling through childhood, my brothers see, babble, delicious remedy, keeping me mixed with them. Love comes from nothing, but it comes. Maybe it's not that day, but near it, a loose, agitated brightness that needs rescuing. The spirits will work anywhere, past the vanilla courtyard's foam, sound flies, shells of grub cravings. Each word makes an outline come out of a body. To think means the looseness is taken away. Red fingernails. Briefly, I dwelt upon my mother's tongue. They put up a swing set in the lobby where we liked to hang. Red fingernails. The polish had been an intoxicant. Rubber trees spoke with red lips. Talking with the spirits didn't seem all that necessary. President Kubitschek is doing his best to welcome the post-colonial companies. My mother rejoins her first language so she can live, and in making numbers, I developed a love of the partially hollow. The other mother tried to give us her body, painting our fingernails in the kitchen. It was like growing sunsets. During this time, we rarely spoke English. We understood because of what they didn't say. What happened is not how we should measure things. Joy exists because there are delays, those intervals in bodies where two languages mix before the first one has to be lifted away. Remembering form. Early life was a looseness. Even if your preferred mode is fragment, you need syntax to love. Still, there is a leaking when we try to put things together. As a bowl starts out being a bowl, the not boldness drains out of it. Later, form is not something we remember doing, like being born. We are lived by what we didn't have, which is not the same as saying we distinguish it, though sometimes the outline of my husband's ear in the half dark looks like Brazil. So my darling mother, who's 97 now and lives with my brother and his wife, we translated the poetry of Ana Cristina Cesar, who's a Brazilian poet who was an amazing poet who died young and left a great body of work. This book, At Your Feet, was published by Free Verse Editions. And here's one of the very short poems we did together. I'll read it in Portuguese, then in English. Noite Carioca. Diálogo de surdos, não amistoso no frio, atravanco na contramão, suspiros no contrafluxo. Te apresento a mulher mais discreta do mundo, essa que não tem nenhum segredo. Carioca Night. Dialogue of the deaf. No, friendly in the cold. I go against traffic, sighing against the flow. I present to you the most discreet woman in the world, the one who has no secrets. Ana Cristina Cesar. And my mother's translations, which I turned into English poems, but we were also aided by Katrina Dotson and Sebastian Edson Macedo. So I'm going to go on with my little journey here through the span by entering the books of the 4 elements that I worked on for a couple of decades, starting with Cascadia. So I'll read the first poem in Cascadia and dedicate it to Susan McCabe and to Calpedient, who live in Santa Monica. One of the things I was trying to do in this book was to represent the immense range of California geology in extremely intense poems that would layer reality in these little strata. So a lot of the poems have a sort of open look like that in singlets and couplets. Sediments of Santa Monica. A left margin watches the sea floor approach. It takes 30 million years. It is the first lover. More saints for Augustine's mother. A girl in red shorts shakes Kafka's The Trial free of some sand. A left margin watches the watcher from Dover. After the 20th century, these cliffs looked like ribbons on braids or dreads. A dream had come right over with a sort of severe leakage. Ah, love, let us be true to one another. Went down to the Ferris wheel, God's Rolodex. There were neon spikes around everyone like the Virgin spikes, old punk's mohawk, evidence of inner fire. Road throwing words off, red current, light swearing, ah love, the century had become a little drippy at the end. We're still growing, but the stitches hurt. Let us be true to one another for the world. Easy on the myths now, make it up, sleep well. I forgot to mention that that poem, of course, makes references to Matthew Arnold's Dover Beach. The cliffs at Santa Monica look very different from the Dover cliffs, but I somehow always am reminded of them. And it also makes reference to the fact that St. Augustine's mother is Monica. So it's quite full of references there. So I'm going to read two very strange poems, and these poems may not make surface sense right away. This one is dedicated to Michael Ondaatje and to Barbara Guest, and a little bit to, well, not a little bit, to William Blake. The title, I stole the title from one of his etchings, Sweeping the Interpreter's House. An individual transgressive arrow is shot through everything. The six-gendered wind wipes it away. Nightshade, infinity, against you to get to you. Now a fly, smoothing its gloves for a black prom. So one of the things I did in Cascadia was that I drove around and I visited the California missions. And I was thinking a lot about the indigenous peoples who had suffered in the process of making those missions, and the colonization, and also the fact that inside the missions there's a lot of abstraction of design and beauty. It's not just religious iconography. And so I decorated the poems with punctuation a lot of the time, and I put little tableaus around them. This poem is from Mission Santa Barbara, which was built in 1786. And what I would do was that I would go in the mission and I would just try to receive the language. And I would sit usually in the front row or someplace inside, and I would just write. I would just take notes that were kind of received phrases. This is sort of a post-Easter poem, and I'm dedicating it to the child Lily, who has a birthday today, and it was requested, Jesse Nathan, our dear friend. Christ's height. A lily advanced in 3 ways, algebra powder on its tongue. Centuries passed, a poet burst with happiness. Talk to the breathless gardener about this. Take his body from the uranium castle. Triangle, notify the lily. I will notify the bee for you. Waking design, suffering confusion, paling beside the sided water, the awkward grid. We were called by being to a savage state. It rings a polychromatic bee bell, wing form, count your 3s. The next time we see him, we'll laugh. That last part refers to, I was reading a lot of Gnostic texts throughout the writing of Cascadia and Loose Sugar and really Bright Existence also. And one of the things in the Gnostic myths is that Christ laughed in the face of suffering, which I have a lot of interest in and questions about. So I'm going to read 2 sections of a documentary. I got really interested in very early on in documentary poetry, as in in the 70s and 80s before it was quite a thing. But Muriel Rukeyser has always been a kind of inviting poet to me. And so the idea of taking document and putting document into your poem. So I'm going to read two sections of a poem called the Shirley poem that's in Cascadia. And Dame Shirley was the wife of a doctor who served the miners in the gold rush, and she kept very careful journals and letters. So I used her letters a lot. I sampled them in when I was exploring the gold rush area of California and my trips around. I'm going to dedicate this to Susan Brianti and Tess Taylor and also Aris Jamal Dunkel, who have all worked with documentary materials about Western matters. The Shirley poem, so this is part 2. Hot water pushed quartz and gold in solution through magma to surface as sunbeams and as wedding rings. Reconceiving bodies, we call them veins. We write in a similar vein. Shirley, a doctor's wife traveling to California in 1851, writes of her geological deficiencies and delights in ever-changing surfaces when she's just arrived at the new camp called Rich Bar. Men are filling pans with dirt. I gather from their remarks that these bars are formed by deposits of earth crowding the river aside, occupying a portion of its bed. A solution to an individual is reading more. Of course, there was no mother lode. Of course, it was unlikely. 3. Recovering from an individual as one reads, eyes too busy to go backward. Shirley, who hadn't made it far into history, writes to her sister in a lively, modest style, imitating Bret Harte's literariness of the death of Mrs. B., a miner's wife. Reading at night, if you're tired, like a pickaxe, the eye falls on each word and makes holes in a territory. Some were amazed when some others at the conference claimed their stylistic territory. From inside the claim, a mineral self leaks out. The text of a woman's body, the body supported by 2 butter tubs. The woman's coffin of unstained pine lined with white cambric. Little Mrs. B, unimpressed by exterior dramas and wreaths of thoughtful snowflakes. A dead woman is when we lie down to read at night, to read among those who've lived. So, making the journey through the elements. This is the air book. It's called Pieces of Air in the Epic. And Brian Tier requested a poem from this book. So I always say I write 3 kinds of poems, short, medium, and long. This is a longer poem, but I'm really sort of opposed to boring long poems. But so it looks like this. There are twice as many words on one side as on the other, and when you read it, you read sort of across, which is meant to sort of imitate a shuttle that makes cloth. So I started this poem when so-called we, had invaded Iraq. Bob and I were living in Berlin, and I was really enchanted by the idea of, not enchanted, obsessed with the idea of making cloth and unseen labor, and especially the unseen labor of women, and also nationalism. So all those things are in the poem. And then I finished it in Berkeley when we got home. So it takes about 5 minutes to read. And I'm dedicating it not only to Brian, but also to Leif Haas, who is an amazing person, and he's a doctor, and he's referred to in this poem. It's called String Theory Sutra. There are so many types of personal in poetry. The eye is a needle some find useful, though the thread, of course, is shadow. In writing of experience or beauty, a cloth emerges as if made from a twin existence. It's July 4, air is full of mistaken stars, and the wiggly half-zeros stripes make, when folded into fabric, meant never to touch ground ever again. The curved cloth of Sleeping Beauty, around 1310, decades after the spinning wheel gathered stray fibers in a whir of spindles before the swath of the Industrial Revolution, and by 1769, a thread stiff enough for the warp of cotton fabric from the spinning frame, the spinning jenny, the spinning mule or muslin wheel, which wasn't patented. By its, I mean our, for we would become what we made. String theory posits no events when it isn't a metaphor. Donut twists in matter, 10 to the minus 33 centimeters. It's inverted fragments like Bay Area poetry. Numbers start the world for grown-ups, and wobbly fibers coaxed from eternity are stuffed into stems of dates like today. So the way people are proud of their flag can enter the pipes of a 4. Blithe astonishment in the holiday music over the picnickers. A man waves from his spandex biking outfit, cloth that both has and hasn't lost its nature. Unexpected folds are part of form, where our park is kissed by eucalyptus insect noises. Making that for you. Flag cloth has this singing quality. Airline pilots wear wool blend flag ties from Target to protect their hearts. Women making weavings of unicorns and castles hummed as they sewed, spiral horns with thread so real it floated. Such artists were visited by figures in beyond type garments, so they could ask how to live. It's all a kind of seam. Flying shuttles, 1733, made weaving-like experience full of terrible accidents and progress. Flags for the present war were made in countries we bombed in the last war. By we, you mean they. By you, it means the poem. By it, I mean meanings that hang like tatters of dawn's early light in wrinkled sections of the Druid oak with skinny linguistic branches, Indo-European roots, and the weird particle earth spirits. A voice came to me in a dream beyond time. Love, we are your shadow thread. A little owl with stereo eyes spoke over my head. I am a seamstress for the missing queen. The unicorn can't hear. It puts its head on our laps. Fibers, beauty at the low level, fabric styles the cottage industry of thought. Threads inspired this textile picnic. The satin ponytail holder, the gauze pads inside Band-Aids, saris, threads of the basketball jersey, turbans, lays over pink shorts, sports bras. A young doctor told us he's like Chekhov, an atheist believer in what's here, that sometimes sitting with his dying patients, he says, God bless you. It seems to help somewhat. They don't know what causes delays between strings. By they, I mean the internet. It turns out all forces are similar to gravity. We search for meaning ceaselessly. By we, I mean we. Sewed it uswards, with flaws between strings. It seems there is no revolution in the Planck scale. My sisters and I worked for the missing queen. She said, be what you aren't, a paradox. There are some revolutions, rips in matter. The bent knots inside our fabric whirred and barely mattered anymore. Our art could help take vividness to people, but only if they had food. No revolutions helped the workers ever, really very long. We worked on this or that flag after sewing this or that unicorn. They called Trotsky back from Canada. Tribes were looser than nations. Nations did some good, but not so very always, and the types of personal and art turned and turned. Nylon parachutes in 1937. We shall not flag nor fail, wrote Churchill. O night, tie our scarf on your neck. There are more than two ways to make beauty, so movements end like sutras or horizons somewhat frayed. Je et un autre, wrote Rimbaud, the gun runner. Over and inner and code. The unicorn, c'est moi. The rips by which the threads are tethered to their opposites like concepts of an art, which each example will undo. We wrote of meanings. I, it, we, you, he, they, am, is, are sick about America. Colors forgive flags, red as the fire skirt of the goddess Ashira, white as the gravity behind her eye, blue for the horizon unbuttoned so the next world will get through. It's not a choice between art and life, we know this now, but still, how shall we live? Oh, shadow thread. After the cotton workers' lockout 1922, owners cut back sweatshop hours to 44 per week. In string theory, the slippage between string and theory makes air seem an invented thing, and perhaps it is. Skepticism mixed with fear that since nothing has a singular purpose, we should not act. To make reality more bearable for some besides ourselves. There's a moment in Southey's journal when the tomb is opened and the glow beast exits right before the flying shuttle has revolutionized their work, by their, I mean our, and cut costs by half. So lines are cut to continue them, and if you do help others, don't tell. String theory posits symmetry or weight. My country's 'tis of installing provisional governments. Why was love the meaning thread? Textiles give off tiny singing no matter what. Washable rayon, airport carpets, checked flannel smocks of nurses, caps, pillowcases, prom sashes, and barbecue aprons with insignias or socks people wear before, during sexual thrills, after dark subtitled Berkeley movies next to t-shirts worn by crowds in raincoats. Human fabric is dragged out. Being is sown with terror or awe, which is also joy. Einstein called the mystery of existence the fundamental emotion. Remember? You unraveled in childhood till you were everything. By everything, I mean everything. The unicorn puts its head on your lap. From there, it sees the blurry edge. How am I so unreal, and yet my thread is real? It asks sleepily. Okay. It's really very odd giving a poetry reading in the pandemic with none of your dear faces close by. So I'll read a poem from the Water Book. And I'm dedicating this poem to Camille Dungy and to you students at University of Virginia that I'm hoping will be inspired to do a little activism once you can do it without danger to yourselves. I did a lot of, as I talked about in my third talk, I did a lot of going to DC to hand people folders with facts and poems in them. So you can put your facts on one side of the folder and your poem on the other side and hand it to the congressional people. So this was about visiting the Virginia senator at the time. And it refers to Shelley's A Defense of Poetry. Shelley wants you to visit Congress when he writes A Violet in the Crucible, and when he notes imagination is enlarged by a sympathy that you may intuit environments as endangered creatures do when 7 million pounds of nitrogen flows into the Chesapeake. As you push open the cherrywood door and the intern looks up from her map of wheels beside the philodendron with streaked anemic arrows and the jar of pens from pharmaceutical firms, Shelley knows you are endangered as the eyeless shrimp Stygobromus hyee, living among rocks upstream in Virginia, feeding on dying leaves is, or the congressman you came to visit is endangered, feeding in the Rayburn cafeteria with a lobbyist from Bechtel, having left his aide endangered in the faux Maple Carroll to work on the war funding bill, where seedlings of the law have finished sprouting. You look at things to make them speak. You have thread-like legs found only in your species. The cogs are selling credits to the dams for phosphorus to go into the sea. When Shelley says the poet is the legislator, he means as the dusky-tailed darter from Tennessee legislates, or the Indiana bat Myotis sodalis, the dwarf wedge mussel half buried in Maryland with your bivalve in silt of your wetland habitat, as you, the vanishing northeastern bulrush from Massachusetts, legislate by shrinking. He doesn't mean you will live. He means you will live on listen. As the sturgeon in 1,000,000 pounds of phosphorus or the snowy plover from Cascadia might. The aid is living on listen too. He takes your words. There's a little view in his left eye which tries to focus on your nervous speech, a stubby tassel swinging on his shoe. He's got a friend in the Marines who likes it over there instead of working in the tire shop after high school. The punctuation falling from your eyes, his eyes, its eyes, their eyes, is merging with as he explains the Pentagon budget. His sentences forming a 5-star alkaline. We cannot leave them there without weapons. He cannot see the stars camped in your heart, the bunched up stars, though he also has stars in his heart, and his friend the Marine has stars. When Shelley notes the poet is meant to cheer, he means your name is on the list right here. He means if you don't survive this way, there are others. He means send the report with your body. I want to thank Karen Gander, who Karen went with me on that trip, and she was teaching at the time, and we pleaded with the senator to stop funding the wars, the occupations. This is dedicated to Rita Duff, who printed this in an issue she was editing. And it is a new poem, and it's shaped kind of like that. It's got a shape. The American Burying Beetle. It's about an endangered beetle. The American burying beetle lives under only 6 states. With its faceted black and orange head, it resembles those outfits in the 1920s when the tombs at Karnak were explored. The bug belongs to the family Sylphidae and the genus Necrophorus. During this awful year when humans are upset, the American burying beetle goes on at the brink of extinction, costing the oil and gas industry millions of dollars, while it carries the bodies of dead creatures underground to lay its eggs on the corpses, lurching and arching its femurs and its tarsi and its geometrical bright parts to farm the rotting flesh for its larvae to feast on, and when they are ready to fly off from. What a wonder that so much exists with no guile, that existence itself has no rival, and it goes on as the thing most steadily hoped for. When I feel desperate about humans, I think of this worker under the 6 states, remaking the dead. So I have just a few poems left to read to you. Got my notes here. So I'm going to read a poem for all the children who have been out of school this year and how, brave they've been. I doubt many of them are at this reading, but I'm dedicating this to my grandson, Leon, who's been particularly brave with his brothers. The letters learn to breathe twice, and this is from a book, the fire book, Seasonal Works with Letters on Fire. The letters learn to breathe twice. When the danger of fire has passed, the children, even when wanting to text, form letters with pencils, tracing gray skin around the unsayable, while geese honk overhead, in their wedge of funny adults. The children try to be normal, though no one knows what normal is. At nearby gardens, the unwanted dandelion, Taraxacum officinale, a large squash prepares for harvest, its S-shaped stem with moisture bent. Children braid languages, and some are praised for confidence, but who praises the garden for all that breath? The cheerful, mild, constant anxiety of your childhood turned to writing, And then meaning came with its invincible glare. The page had borders but no limit, and you loved letters then. Their breath allowed not to decide as it curved between skin bearer and the being said. So I'll read a few poems, a couple poems from the Extra Hidden Life Among the Days, and then I'll read a couple new poems. And thank you so much for everything today. This is from a series of poems that I wrote that Race's intro referred to about lichen. I was thinking a lot about Rosa Parks and Rosa Luxemburg, and the contrasting activisms of hoping for a real upheaval revolution and a nonviolent practice of activism where you are doing civil disobedience. And it's from a series of poems called Metaphor and Simile. Day 13. Some say poets should not use metaphor. Oh, sleepy leaves who did not understand. Some say you do not use it. Everything is already it, and thus it is our heart, which is a metaphor and not. It was a dappled afternoon. No binaries, no false praise or bullshit. It was apparent something had been transferred and remained untraceable. What is poetry for? Its lives become untraceable. The faster magic of its skin comes back, all the raw power you had. For poets, it is an undercommons. Fred and Stefano note skin, emotion. It registers as life forms. Lecanora with its creamy apothecia growing like baby epics on a branch. And this is what it will be like in what we want to call the stateless world. And when we dream, it stays with us, it stays with us, it stays for all who sit in the dusk with poetry loving the world. Bob and I participated in an action on Ash Wednesday at the White House that was opposing the Keystone Pipeline. And I know some of you have been reading this poem for a class, so I thought I'd read it for you. Describing tattoos to a cop. We'd been squatting near the worms of the White House lawn protesting the Keystone Pipeline. I could sense the dear worms through the grillwork fence, twists and coils of flexi script, remaking the soil by resisting it. After the ride in the police van telling jokes, our zip-locked handcuffs pretty tight, when the presiding officer asked, "Do you have any tattoos?" "Yes, officer, I have 2. "What are they?" "Well, I have a black heart on my inner thigh and an alchemical sign on my ankle." "Please spell that." "Alchemical, ALCHEMICAL. "What is that?" "It's basically a moon, a lily, a star, and a flame." He started printing in the little square. Moon, lily, star. Young white guy, seemed scared, one blurry tattoo on his inner wrist. I should have asked what his was, but couldn't cross the chasm. Outside, Ash Wednesday in our nation's capital. Dead grass, spring trees about to burst. 2 officers beside the newish van. Inside, alchemical notes for the next time. And reading this this was also requested. It's kind of an Ars Poetica, and it has to do with a plum tree that's near our house. I call it the bride tree because it sort of explodes at this time of year. The bride tree can't be read. The bride tree puts down its roots below the phyla. It is there when we die and when we are born. middle and upper branches reaching the planet heart by the billions during a revolution we don't see. Quarks and leptons are cooling on their infant stems, spinning the spinning brain of matter, fled to electrical dark water, species with names the tree can hold in the shale shade brought by the ambulance of art. No one but you knows what occurred in the dress you wore in the dream of atonement, the displaced tree in the dream you wore, a suffering endurable only once, edges that sought release from envy to a more endurable loss, a form to be walked past that has outworn the shame of time, its colors sprung through description above a blaze of rhizomes, spreading in an arable mat that mostly isn't simple, but is calm and free. So I'll read two more poems dedicated to you with your writing. And I want to thank a few other friends who have sustained me through this year. Louise Glick and Sharon Olds, and my friend Cynthia Parker O'Henny, whose book is coming out next year. Amaka, people who just send notes and texts. Very important to me to hear from people, as I'm sure it is to you. So this is a feeling right before the feeling. There's always a feeling right before the feeling that you're having. So I was trying to get at that. At sunrise, the deer eat pieces of the quiet. They eat spaces between the quiet and the sounds. And the numbers on the calendar lie flat in their boxes. They leak through tiny holes in the minutes, evenly so evenly, an active sense before the sense was made. They are now opposite to set down, the agreed upon, the shape of the obvious, drawn by an earlier enchantment before the new anxiety set in. The workers are safe, the terror stilled for an hour, a lover's outline, dreamed or imagined, before you read the one-page book again. What was that book? It had no copyright. And what was before? A life, the dazzler, the dark, the singing dust. It turned when you turned. It Orpheus knew what you forgot when you took the bowl of burning time across the room. And if the previous is closer to you now, should you look? Doesn't matter if you do. You carry the sum of it with it out into it. So this is the final poem, and it's from the series that I referred to that I've been writing during COVID. I was thinking about what the voice of the age would be, and there's so many possibilities for it. So I was trying to put that in here. Thank you for listening, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer or try to answer a couple of them. So this is to the voice of the age, and to C.D. Wright, great being, and to all the beloved women who have been great in our lives. To the voice of the age. They gave up their fear of sincerity. They gave up their decorated nights. Evening birdsong had folded into chalk. Evening shadows grew less white. We'd been faithful mostly to our own special tribe. Couldn't keep the burned forests alive. Of the beasts of the apocalypse, one was light green. It was a dream. We didn't choose that. We chose the rat, the cat, the fox, the past. And when we sang to ourselves, the song went, "What is the voice of the age, my friends? What is the age of the voice? Adenine, guanine, cytosine, uracil. The voice of the age is a fragment. Oh, sea of glass, cart of straws. Oh, air round as the love of moths. Hard to forgive certain centuries, my friends. The age of the voice is the choices. The voice of the page is the voices. Oh, love song in an old blue cart, wheel of ciphers, wheel of eyes, wheel of beauty, code, and blues. The voice of the age is the voices. Okay.
Thank you so much, Brenda. I'm like taking a moment to let that, it was beautiful. So we'll now move to question and answers. If you all want to put questions you have for Brenda in the chat. And as those roll in, Brenda, maybe I'll start by asking, I know people might ask you some questions, but I'm wondering if there's any questions that you're holding close in your own poetry or broader in the world right now that are, you're turning over.
Whether I have any questions for you.
Questions for the audience, or also
Oh.
like in your own work, I guess, like the questions that are coming up for you right now.
Well, I mean, I do constantly feel, I was talking to a group of students, not in our community right now, but at another venue, who somebody brought up the question, what good is poetry? Just the usual question of why are we bothering, and what is this about? What is this? What's the purpose of this enterprise? And I mean, there are just so many possibilities for that. But one can't help doing it, obviously. But I do feel like the values of poetry are so intense and so absolutely integral to our lives that poetry is bigger than poetry in some way. Yeah, so that's one question I think about just pretty much every day. Yeah, what's the question you think of?
Oh, I've been thinking a lot about our previous conversation around failure. And I think a lot about what you said about trying to write the poem that you don't know how to write. And so it's such a gift to get to hear your poetry over time and hear the movement between those poems. And
it feels sometimes like you just have to reinvent your enterprise, in part to keep your imagination vital, because I think we all learn sort of tricks and attributes of an art, and for me the job is so big and so immense, is to live way more intensely through poetry. And the intensity of life is sometimes seems almost unbearable. You know what I mean? Like almost unbearable. And the only way you can get at it is by representing it somehow in a little piece of language that you get more intensely to experience. And then I just feel as if we all, if we really lived at the level that we're supposed to be living at, we would all just be, it would just be way too full.
Absolutely. I see questions in the chat. Do you have energy for?
Yeah, I do. I love Q&As. So, and we should just tell people, because because it's past dinner time there. You can leave anytime you need to, but I can answer a few. Yeah, for sure.
Wonderful. A question came in. Part of the extraordinary, glorious originality of your work is the inclusivity of attention to the world and the groundedness in the body. Could you talk about how you came to the ability and possibility of sending the report from the body in so wide a way?
Oh, that's such a lovely question. Well, as probably you heard, I don't have a mind body split. I have a sort of weird animistic thing that happens, but I do feel there's an intensity that poets have, and sometimes it seems as if we can't make that leap to others. So I do a meditative practice that I call a trance practice, which brings the very strange. I read that one very peculiar poem that I'm sure nobody understood that poem, the William Blake poem, but that where you just are receiving language from the depth of yourself. And I feel that's one job for poetry, is to enact those depths. And you have to bring it out and you have to bring it forward. And it doesn't necessarily have to have application to everybody's experience. It just has to have a deep application to your own. I guess over time, from a great solitude and what seems like a very introverted and peculiar nature, I started thinking, if we live deeply enough, and this is really what being with a lot of very brave poets in my generation, I have to say, a lot of brave, and you probably could tell the aesthetic range I'm interested in is pretty wide. So that poets from, Sharon Olds to Lynn Haginian to C.D. Wright, Camille Dungy, to all of these mighty women doing this work, for me, was a lot about physicality and the reality of bringing the soul into the world. So I still believe there's an invisible order that we can't access, and no one can talk me out of that. So, so I talked a little bit in the talk about how, dualism is, I'm of two minds about being a dualist, that I have the sense that there is an invisible reality, that it's not all immanent, that's not accessible to the senses. So sending a report with your body does have to do with, in part, testifying to the invisible. I guess that was a wanting to have it both ways answer to your question. I hope that's forgivable. But
Brenda, we have another question. Do you have any advice for how to continue writing one's whole life?
oh gosh, the Q&A, sometimes there's something that throws you for a writing your whole life. Yes, stay interested in what you don't understand, and insofar as you possibly can, try to stay in a good mood. It's really, really hard to stay in a good mood, but you just fake it. So you go for something that interests you and keep doing it. If your writing doesn't interest you at the moment, then start reading something else, and then put it down and start reading something else. If you're in grief, you just allow it, and then you get your mighty forces. There's so many helpers for our grief right now. We have each other, and we have art, and we have this sort of sense of the Great Spirit, even if it's not deified. It's a universality and a universal spirit that helps us through. And I do think art is a form of eternity that you just keep switching out. If you don't like something 1 minute, you try a different form of art and you keep yourself awake. That's how it's kept going for me. And I live with a great artist, and that has really been, a gift from the universe that I still don't understand why I deserved it, but happened. So look for people that interest you too, and art that interests you. Yeah, that's how you do it.
That's wonderful. Do you have energy for one more question?
I do, or two.
One or two. A question came in about the element books. Do you have a favorite element? What element book was easiest for you to write? And I guess I'll ask the follow-up question, is there an element you feel closest to right now?
Oh, well, of course, again, having it both ways, having it always. I mean, the 4 elements are a construct, of course. And so the extra hidden life among the days was the 5th element. So I was sort of trying to be anti-Greek at that point, earth, air, water, fire. And I felt so sad when I had finished the fire book. And astrologically, I'm a triple fire sign. And so that book was definitely the easiest. Definitely, I could have written like 5 fire books because I'm the triple fire. I loved working on each one of them. And the thing about setting yourself a project, and I think I talked about this in Brian's class, but the thing about setting yourself a project that's really dangerous is that you start writing project-y poems. So one of the best pieces of advice I guess I can give about that is, if you do fall in love with a subject matter like that and just decide, okay, I'm going to write 4 books on the elements, and then suddenly it turns into 20 years, that making sure that if you're a poet, you're still writing line by line. You're still discovering, and you're not getting ahead of yourself like, oh, I should fill in this part of the element with something, so that your head takes over the projectiness of it, which is, I think, a real danger for contemporary poetry. But no, I didn't have a favorite element. It's like being in love. You're just in love, and I fell completely in love with the geology of California while I was driving around, and just it was magical discovery for me to think about the rocks and the layers of strata in that book. And then Air is a very much more mystical and abstract book. It's full of very big swaths of international thought, I guess. And Practical Water, I started that book with thinking about like, where does each droplet of my water, where is that actually coming from, so I just traced the drop of water down. So that book was really fun and very physical to write. And then Fire was just boom. It covered everything, covered all of literature or something. So, and then Extra Hidden Life is about wood. And now I'm working on books about time, and I'm afraid to say it, but I am working on 4 books about time, I think. I'm in the 3rd one. So I have to keep giving myself sort of, it's like bocce ball. You throw the ball way out in front of you. So yeah, I hope that helps your practice. The main thing is that, just keeping yourself interested in the next thing.
That is amazing news for every one of us out there, that there are more Brenda Hillman books.
Okay.
So maybe with that, I see no more questions in the Q&A.
Well, there,
And
there was one in the chat. Somebody said I left the chat on, and so somebody asked about whether it was easy or hard living with another poet, being with another poet all the time. That was one of the questions, Brenda. I don't know if you want to tackle that one. You already have a little bit.
I live with the most good-natured and adorable person, but artists' temperaments are difficult. We're both very secretive about what we're working on, and then we eventually show each other. Like I can complain for 2 or 3 weeks about a poem, and I'm afraid to show Bob a draft. And then eventually, after I've been complaining and complaining and complaining, then finally I'll decide, well, I guess I'd better show the draft about what I've been complaining about, so that he'll even have a context. But artists are temperamental, even really nice ones, and we're all very touchy, and and we've got, I put, by the way, thanks to Luke Hass and to Jesse Nathan for these flowers, but this is like, an artist's soul here. And it's very complex, and it's arranged and everything. And so we're all just way too fragile in good ways and not so good ways. But anyway, I hope some of this will help kind of inspire you to go do your writing. My work is intense, and I put a lot into each line, so that you'll get a lot out of each line. But sometimes I say, well, maybe it's good to read poetry. Even after your poetry reading, you have to look at it. So anyway, I hope it inspires you. And thanks to Raisa, and thanks to Jeb, and all of you for coming tonight.
I was just going to share one thing on the way out, Brenda. I was starting a backup computer just in case anything went wrong today. And sitting right above it was the poster from when you were here in 04 and 05 as
wow.
one of the Ray writers. So it was fun to
Oh, wow.
have that happen. And I have your Monticello receipt and your signature to prove that you were here once before. So it's been such a pleasure to have you back. A while after the original visit. I'm sorry that this one couldn't be in person, but it sure was a great thing to have you with us and with our students and our faculty for this last semester.
Oh my God, my pleasure. And I just hope, I look forward to meeting with the students, and best of luck and love to all your community as you get through this time. And let's keep art and each other close and safe.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank
Good night.
you.
Good
Good
night,
night.
everybody.
Good night.